So, Guild Wars 2 recently came out with the 2v2 game mode, and this is interesting because for all of eternity, basically, the only game mode that was accepted was the Conquest game mode. And a lot of people had issues with this, but personally, I think that Conquest is by far the best game mode and is even better than 2v2, and I'm going to try to detail why. I think that 2v2 has some issues that need to be resolved for it to become a better game mode, and kind of explain how 2v2 works. So, first of all, recently they came out with Hull of the Mists and the Asura Arena 2v2 maps. And these are 2v2 maps, and what happens is you have two people per side, and the game starts and it's just deathmatch. So whoever kills the other team, both players on the other team first, wins. And that is a lot different than Conquest, because you respawn in Conquest and are allowed to go out, and there's a lot of risk taking that you're allowed to do in Conquest because you just respawn. But in 2v2 you actually feel a lot more stress in these small scale decisions that you make, because if you die, then you're dead for the rest of that round. And obviously you get 2 rounds. It's a best of 3 each match, so you do kind of get a chance to make up for a mistake. But at the same time, there's that feeling of, oh, we made that mistake, now we really have to get in gear. And if you lose the first round to a mistake and then you fix that mistake, you still give the other team a chance to adapt to your adaptation. So it's kind of, I would say that best of 3 is probably the best still, because if you're like in a really bad matchup and you're gonna lose anyways, then you don't want to like just sit there lingering in like a boring match. And I think a best of 3 kind of allows you to have that surprise factor as well, to kind of counter comp people, which is, in my opinion, another issue with 2v2, is because it's very rock paper scissory. So what I mean by this is there are a few comps that are being played. So for example, there's double DPS, which is something like Core Guardian and Revenant. You could say Mesmer Thief is like a double DPS, but I would say that it's like it's a kind of a unique double roamer comp. Another one would be like Core Guardian and like some kind of like DPS Ranger. Double DPS is pretty good at like having high pressure at the start, but it loses out to the double 1v1 comp, which is like Hollows and Soul Beasts, Boon Beasts, or like Strength Warriors, like classes that have a lot of self-sustain but can also dish out damage. And how that works is the double solo, or the double 1v1 comp, just whoever is being focused by the double DPS comp, because in 2v2 you really want to be coordinating who you attack. You don't want to just be randomly attacking anyone. You need to focus target. So whoever is being focused on the double 1v1er comp, they just kite and resustain, while the other 1v1er just goes ham, and they're allowed the luxury of being a 1v1er, which has high sustain. Whereas the double DPS comp, DPSs don't really have high sustain, so they rely on being evasive and disengaging, but that's not really that possible in this map because it's very small, it's very cramped, and the terrain, while there is some verticality and kite spots to it, it is rather small and cramped. So yeah, it's hard for a double DPS comp to win if they don't get a really good advantage at the start with like a coordinated pressurized like burst. So yeah, those are 2 of the comps that are being used. Another one is support and then like hyper carry DPS. So that's usually something like Tempest or Firebrand will be the support, and then you have like a Necro who's either Scourge or Reaper, or you could even have a Revenant maybe as, or like a DPS Hollow as the DPS part in that comp. And that comp is really good because it's very safe. So if like you go against a comp like that's just very lackluster, a support and a DPS will usually be very good against that. So like say you go against like Trap Ranger and like Staff Ellie, there's no way that you lose to that if you have support, because you have a lot of room to work with it, and you're very compartmentalized. So the damage is very strong. So like you can focus one person just with your DPS, and they can't really focus you because they don't have enough pressure, because well, their builds aren't great enough. But like say if the support plus DPS comp goes against a double DPS comp, that can be the counter, because the double DPS comp can just go very aggressive because the support doesn't provide enough pressure to really counter pressure the double DPS. So they can either just sit on top of the DPS portion of the support DPS comp, and that prevents that person from counter pressuring, and essentially it makes it so that there's no counter pressure, right? Because the support isn't going to do damage. So if the DPS is unable to do damage because it's trying to kite so much, then you're really put on the back foot there, because there's so much pressure there. So double DPS can kind of counter a support DPS. As far as like the 1v1er comp versus support DPS, I'm pretty sure the support plus DPS comp beats the 1v1er comp, because they just shrug off all the damage that the 1v1 comp does, because they don't do enough damage, and they'll just eventually get out sustained. So yeah, those are kind of the main three comps. It's double DPS, 1v1er, or it could be like 1v1er plus DPS. That's kind of like I've seen like Soul Beast plus Deadeye. That's actually a pretty decent comp, because the Soul Beast can be kind of tanky and create presence, which forces the enemy team to make a decision, and then the Deadeye or whatever can be very evasive and wait for the right moment to go in, but the enemy is being forced to make bad decisions and overextend because they need to deal with the Soul Beast at the same time. So that's kind of good, but that comp isn't amazing versus the support DPS comp. It's very good versus the double 1v1er comp, and it's sort of good versus the double DPS comp, but there's a lot of, as you can see, like rock paper scissors going on here. So it's like if I go in as this comp and I'm countered, it's kind of like, well, there is some room for outplay, but it feels kind of bad at the same time. So it's like there is some balance issues with the 2v2, and this is especially evident with the Thief class, because Thief is very based on rotations in Conquest, right? And it's really bad at 1v1s because of that. It relies on outnumbering people, but how are you going to create an outnumbered situation using your mobility if the map is so small and there's only 2 people on the map? So you're going to be in a 2v2 the whole time. You can't create outnumbered situations because there's only one objective: kill the enemy. So the enemy just sticks together and there's no outnumbering. Now there are some things that you can do, like with Mez Thief, where you split the enemy team by disengaging and re-engaging very quickly and poking them down. But for the most part, yeah, Thief isn't the best choice in 2v2s, as we can see, because the 2 best thieves in the game, Toker and Syngener, actually didn't get very far in the monthly 2v2 tournament. And that's just because there's so much cheese, like 2v2 like builds out there, that they can just output more damage, output more sustain than a Thief can. and really the only thing that the thief can do is provide burst. So it does feel like Deadeye might be one of the better choices for the thief in 2v2, which is kind of sad, but at the same time, there is some nice counterplay going on with being able to understand what your enemies are running and then kind of like swap your utilities and amulet before facing them. And a lot of times, because you're only given 30 seconds before the match starts, and then each round of that match you're given another 30 seconds to change your all your runes and stuff, or you can even swap characters. You don't really have that much time to counter comp, so that's kind of good, but at the same time there is a lot of like mind gaming there, and you can see like say like there's a double DPS comp, and then the enemy team goes like double prot hollow, because double prot hollow is, each one of those is insanely resistant to being focused, and they both deal out really high damage. So it's like, yeah, there's a lot of it's kind of like unskillful to play 2v2, because you can just get counter comped, and then no amount of gameplay can change what you do, and it just kind of feels kind of weird, because 2v2s at the moment are only in ATs, so you can't really get that much practice in those matchups. Even if like it's a counter to you really need to be able to learn how to counter it, or play around your own counter, or even learn how to counter things, right? So that's kind of weird. I think that 2v2 should probably be enabled in some kind of way. I don't think there should be a ranked queue, because there are these issues with the balance, right? Where it's so easy to counter comp someone. It kind of diminishes the integrity of like a rating system, because I feel like it's not balanced enough for you to say, oh, this team is actually better than them, because in reality better players are actually losing to others just because of their comp. And you could argue that they are better because they're better at comping, and I can agree with that. So I do like that 2v2s exist in the game, and they create new situations and kind of like strategies that are interesting, but at the same time there are some issues that need to be fixed. So let's talk about the timer mechanic, because after 2 minutes of the match, right, you're given a sudden death mechanic, which means all healing is disabled, and there's going to be a deathly fog which comes in from the sides of the map, and kind of like it crunches you, right, and it forces you to get closer to each other, or you die to the mist, right? And this is kind of, actually, I like this mechanic because the lack of healing makes support comps, it prevents them from supporting each other, right, because they stop healing. And then the mist forces like roamer or like disengagey comps to get closer, so it kind of like it balances out all the different comps together, except maybe the double 1v1er comp is probably nerfed by more so by both mechanics, right? Because the double 1v1er comp is it's very sustain based, but it's also very disengage based, right? So I would say that the double 1v1er comp is probably the worst in the end game scenario. But then again, if you have like a support, they can only do healing as their build is made for, right? So the only thing they can do really is kind of like prevent damage rather than heal it up, and they can't really do that much damage. So it kind of feels like it's pretty balanced, that mechanic. It balances out the kind of boringness that comes with deathmatch. And this was like an issue that came out with Courtyard when that deathmatch came out. it was like 5v5 deathmatch, and the issue with it was, well, if you die, all you have to do is just disengage and just, play safe and just don't die, and then the timer runs out, and then you'll just win by points. And that was a kind of a poorly done deathmatch, right? So I do like this deathmatch much better than way back when they tried to do it with Courtyard. So that is pretty interesting. But the thing is, the mechanic isn't really that balanced yet, because the mist actually takes longer to take effect than the healing does, right? So as soon as the healing is removed, right, you can just go in on them, and you can take advantage of the sustain comp having no ability to use their healing by immediately engaging on them. But you can still disengage and stuff like that, because the map hasn't, it takes a while for the map to get smaller. So it is kind of a little bit of a disadvantage there. I think maybe if the healing reduction was maybe reduced to like 20% rather than 0%, that would maybe be a little bit better. And that would also kind of make it so that support comps aren't completely useless, but they're mostly useless, right? So that is kind of something that I would change about 2v2. Is I would, it's kind of rough, because, right, support plus DPS is actually one of the strongest comps in the game right now, right? But I would still say that there are some issues with some builds that are they're too stally, and then they can abuse the end game mechanic, right? So if you run double blood necro or something like that, and you can just res each other until you get to the end timer, and then when the end timer happens, you have 2 DPS, right? And then you can just go full ham at that point. But even though you're going to be blood necros, which don't have that much damage, so it's kind of like there's some cheese in the game there with builds that have a lot of sustain but also have a lot of damage. So I think the issue with 2v2 comes from mostly the balance of the game, more so than the design of 2v2. I think the 2v2 design is really good, so maybe you don't need to make any changes to the design of 2v2, but rather just balance the game a little bit differently. And I mean, to be honest, this wouldn't affect Conquest negatively too, because all the builds that have this nasty sustain, like Boon Beast, Blood Necro, Engineer, is just like a really high sustain class while also having a high damage. I think that, and having Elixir S and having Perma Quickness, like the classes that feel the most unfair are going to be the easiest to abuse in 2v2, because there's the counterplay to these classes is rotation and team play, right? But the simpler the game is, the easier it is for a busted build to take advantage of others, right? So when you're in like a 5v5 Conquest game, right, and someone's playing Boon Beast, well, what's the counter to Boon Beast if it's the best 1v1 build in the game? Well, what it doesn't have is the ability to go into a team fight and really put out a lot of pressure, right? So there's this complexity of Conquest and rotations, and you can just let the Boon Beast have one point in the map, and then you just team fight on the rest of the map, and then you snowball, right? Like that's the counter to Boon Beast. But when they go into a 2v2 scenario, there's really, you can't rotate in a 2v2, so the imbalance of some builds becomes a lot more apparent. And I think that's one of the issues that we're facing here, is imbalanced builds are, it's harder to go around them. So I think balance patches need to probably come out to address this, and it's good that we've been able to have this event of 2v2 to see how everything went. And I really enjoy 2v2, regardless of all the issues that it has. People with like using exploits and stuff like that. That was all fine. But I think 2v2 is definitely an interesting part of the game. Maybe not make it a ranked queue, maybe not make it only an AT, but it definitely needs to be something that players who want to practice their 2v2s are able to do. So I think maybe an unranked queue for 2v2 would definitely want to be added to the game. Maybe not ranked, and maybe not an AT all the time. We can do special tournaments or whatever, or we can have like one. I don't know about one AT a day for 2v2, because then it's like, well, if you can't make that 2v2 AT, then you can never make it. But yeah, so I would definitely say unranked queue for 2v2s, and that would be, I don't know, it would be kind of weird because you would have really bad matchmaking in there, wouldn't you? So it's kind of, I don't really know how you would go about it, because the tournament system is really good because it has an artificial matchmaking where the further you get into the tournament, the harder your enemies get, and then eventually you get a good match. So it's kind of difficult, but there needs to be some way that people can practice 2v2s. So if you have any suggestions for how they can maybe design a way of making this more accessible, or adding this this potentially good game mode into the game rather than just removing it from the game, because it's not here forever, according to, it may come back. But if you have any suggestions, just comment, and we will hope to see more soon from ANAP.